The year was 1835. In a remote corner of Tennessee, nestled between gnarled trees and fog-choked hills, there stood a house so quietly notorious that even the locals avoided speaking its name aloud. Its windows, darkened with age, reflected nothing but shadows. And within those shadows 4 sisters lived, 4 women whose faces seemed untouched by time, who moved through decades as though chronology itself had failed to reach them. The first record of them appears in a tattered ledger from the county courthouse, the ink smeared, the edges brittle. It mentions only their names: Eliza, Margaret, Clara, and Josephine Halloway. No birth dates. No trace of their parents. Only the notation, appear unearthed over 30 years. By the time a traveling physician arrived in the late 1840s, drawn by whispered rumors of their impossible youth, he wrote in a report that survives only as fragments: skin like alabaster, eyes wide with a lucidity that unsettles. They speak as though decades are strangers to them, yet remember events from 50 years prior with exactitude. Even in his carefully clinical language there is unease, almost fear, as if recording the truth of the sisters had shaken his mind. Locals spoke of them in hushed tones, claiming the sisters appeared at the edge of the woods at twilight, watching the village with eyes too old and too knowing. Children whispered that their laughter, when it broke the silence, carried echoes of sorrow that no child should ever hear. Travelers left the area with pale faces, reporting an inexplicable chill whenever the Halloway house came into view. There were no visible signs of decay on the sisters, yet their surroundings told another story. The house itself, though structurally sound, carried the scent of mildew and dust, the floors creaking as if in protest to each step. And in the attic, a visitor in the 1850s claimed to have glimpsed jars of unidentifiable specimens, dried scrolls with cryptic symbols, and fragments of diaries whose pages disintegrated upon touch. These remnants hint at obsessions with time, life, and control, obsessions that may have tethered the sisters to some unnatural permanence. But the full extent of their secret remained beyond the reach of any official account, buried beneath layers of rumor, fear, and carefully excised town records. I found a fragment of one of those diaries in a private collection decades later. Its cover is cracked, blackened, and almost entirely illegible. Yet one entry, dated 1842, shines through the decay. The words are written in a precise hand, deliberate and unervingly calm. We do not age, not by years, not by thought. The world shifts around us, yet we remain. I saw the baker's boy grow to a man and gray in his hair while our reflection in the mirror whispered nothing. Is it mercy or is it punishment? Time cannot touch us, but it can haunt. There is a subtle cruelty in that observation, a recognition that their state was neither gift nor choice but something else entirely, something tethered to forces the world around them could barely comprehend. It's worth noting that fragments like these were often smuggled out by visitors who survived encounters with the sisters. The majority of official records were meticulously sanitized. Reports from the county, letters from nearby neighbors, even personal journals of those who interacted with the Halloways were redacted, or disappeared altogether. And yet the whispers persisted. One account from a minister in 1838 survives as a small, charred scrap of paper. He writes, "I have seen them in the morning light. They do not bow to the sun, they do not bend to the wind. Their eyes pierce, yet speak nothing. I felt as though my very thoughts were being catalogued, judged." The youngest looked at me and smiled with a knowledge I dared not name. It is easy to dismiss this as hysteria or an overwrought imagination. But when you trace the pattern across multiple accounts, medical reports, travelers' journals, letters smuggled from acquaintances, you find consistency in the same chilling phenomena: unaging faces, eyes that seem to know more than they should, and an aura that distorts time and perception around them. The longer someone remained within proximity of the Halloway estate, the more unervingly vivid the world became, as if every second stretched thin and every shadow acquired intent. Even the natural world seemed to respond to the house in strange ways. Trees leaning toward the Halloway's windows bent unnaturally, their bark scarred as if the air itself demanded sacrifice. Animals avoided the property entirely. One observer noted that birds would circle overhead but never land, leaving only the occasional echo of a feather drifting to the ground. In 1845, a local farmer named Thomas Greer recorded in his ledger that his horse bolted when passing the Halloway Road, whinnying in terror at nothing visible. That horse was never calm again, and Greer himself grew silent, recording little else, only underlining, "Do not approach the sisters," in his ledger for emphasis. This repeated pattern, of avoidance, fear and subtle but pervasive dread, is one of the first signals that something about the sisters' existence violated the ordinary rules of life. The sisters themselves were meticulous about who, or what, they allowed into their world. Visitors were rare, often invited under the pretense of routine social visits or curiosity about their extraordinary longevity. One surviving letter from a distant cousin, torn and browned with age, describes her first encounter. Their hands were cold but not lifeless, their skin flawless as marble. They spoke of the past as if it had occurred yesterday, but their eyes betrayed a weight of centuries I could not name. I dared not stay long, yet felt my every secret flinch beneath their gaze. It is telling that almost every visitor left altered, changed in ways subtle but permanent. Some became obsessively meticulous in their own routines, others developed strange phobias, and a few vanished entirely, their fates unrecorded except in passing local rumor. The sisters' effect on those around them seems almost predatory, though not violent in any conventional sense. Psychological, subtle, and unervingly efficient. The Halloway's methods of maintaining their agelessness remain a matter of speculation, though fragments suggest a disturbing ritualistic pattern. One journal entry, damaged, partially burned, mentions the circle must be maintained, and lists ingredients, some recognizable, others ambiguous, alongside sketches of geometrical symbols that seem designed for both protection and confinement. Another document, a letter from a physician who stayed a month on the estate, states, "I have seen them draw symbols over one another's foreheads in the moonlight. A chant accompanies each motion, though its language is unknown. Afterward, they consume a meal of roots and herbs I cannot name, yet none of them waver or falter." That the rituals appear meticulously repeated over decades implies both purpose and desperation. There is no overt threat, yet the atmosphere suggests coercion, or perhaps self-imposed restraint. Whatever power they wielded over time itself, it may have come at a psychological cost invisible to the casual observer. By 1850, the sisters had begun to attract attention beyond the county. Traveling writers, doctors, and even a few foreign naturalists filed accounts, though few were published. One surviving report from a French physician, scrawled in the margins of his notebook, reads, "The Halloway sisters exhibit a phenomenon I cannot classify. Their physiology appears stable, yet time erodes all else. It is as if they are anchored in a different dimension of chronology. I fear their presence might unravel one's perception of reality." Words like unravel and fear recur across multiple accounts. Here lies the first hint of what would become a recurring theme in all Halloway narratives. Contact with the sisters disrupts not only the body but the mind. Those who lingered too long described fleeting hallucinations, disorientation, and a profound sense of guilt or loss with no identifiable source. At the heart of this story lies the paradox of visibility and erasure. While the sisters' lives are documented in fragments, their existence is simultaneously erased from official histories. County records contain only fleeting mentions. Census documents list them, but with implausible ages and redacted notes. Even contemporary newspapers, often prone to sensationalism, reported only vague accounts of 4 women of eternal youth, and quickly pivoted to other stories, as though a collective censorship had taken hold. Whether deliberate or coincidental, the effect is the same. The Halloways occupy the threshold between memory and oblivion. They are seen yet unseen. known yet unknowable. It is worth pausing here to consider the human fascination with longevity, immortality, and control over life's passage. Most myths surrounding agelessness revolve around ambition, greed, or vanity. The Halloways' case is different. Their obsession, if it can be called that, is quiet, precise, and almost clinical. The Diaries and fragments suggest a detachment from ordinary human desire, replaced instead with a meticulous observation of time and decay. There is no record of love, of marriage, or of children. Only the sisters, the house, and the rituals that appear designed to both preserve and isolate them. Yet this isolation carries its own horrors. One observer, a midwife, wrote in 1847, "They do not weep, nor do they mourn. But there is a shadow in their presence, a sense of waiting. Waiting for what, I cannot say, but it chills the soul." Even as I recount this now, decades removed from their time, it is difficult to shake the feeling that the fragments themselves are watching. The diaries, the letters, the scorched papers, they are more than records. They are artifacts of psychological tension, almost living, as if the Halloways' presence persisted through ink and parchment. A close reading reveals obsessive patterns, repetitions, slight distortions in dates, and inconsistencies that hint at something the sisters themselves could not, or would not, control. Perhaps this is where the story truly becomes dangerous. The closer you look, the more the boundaries between fact, perception, and unexplainable phenomena begin to blur. By the late 1850s, the house had taken on a mythic quality. Travelers arrived not out of curiosity, but as if drawn by some invisible compass. Accounts vary. Some describe brief glimpses through fogged windows, others recount the sisters appearing at the edge of fields in moonlight. A surviving diary fragment notes, "I dared not speak, yet they knew my thoughts. I left before dawn, yet the echo of their presence clung to me, shadowing my waking hours. I dream of them still." This phrase, repeated in different forms across multiple reports, underscores the psychological footprint left by the sisters. Contact with them was not violent, it was invasive in a more subtle, more insidious way. Minds frayed, memories warped, and ordinary temporal rhythms disrupted. In essence, the sisters rewrote reality around them. I should pause here to give you, the viewer, a chance to reflect. If you were to encounter someone, or something, that exists beyond time, that watches your every thought while remaining untouched by the years, how would you respond? The archives suggest that human psychology is not merely tested, but fundamentally rearranged in their presence. I invite you now to comment below with the symbolic phrase, "The silence watches," if you feel drawn into the same unsettling tension as those who encountered the Halloways firsthand. Engaging in this small ritual connects you to a long line of truth seekers who dared approach knowledge they were not meant to hold. And while you do so, consider subscribing, joining our society of truth seekers, where we navigate the dark corners of history few dare enter. Returning to the narrative, one cannot ignore the darker consequences hinted at in the fragments. There are whispered accounts of disappearances, neighbors who vanished after prolonged observation of the sisters, their properties abandoned, their families left in inexplicable turmoil. One surviving police record from 1862 mentions an investigation into a missing merchant. The report is redacted heavily with only a single line visible. Last seen approaching the Halloway estate, subject did not return. Cause unknown. Similar fragments appear across decades, suggesting a recurring pattern. These disappearances were never publicly linked to the sisters, yet the circumstantial evidence is compelling. The Halloway's presence seems to attract, or perhaps demand, the attention of those around them, with consequences that defy normal explanation. Even internal dynamics among the sisters themselves were strange. A diary fragment attributed to Clara, written in 1850, reads, "We cannot leave the circle. To stray is to unravel. We are bound, yet we are free. The door is open, but the path leads only inward. I fear that even the oldest among us forgets what it is to sleep untroubled." The language is cryptic, almost ritualistic, But the meaning is clear. Their longevity is tethered to a structure, psychological, mystical, or both, that requires adherence, compliance, and an acceptance of isolation. There is no casual immortality here. It is a careful, perhaps torturous equilibrium maintained over decades. As we begin to piece together the patterns of their existence, a chilling motif emerges: the interplay between observation and control. The sisters are simultaneously subject and agent, participants in a system that preserves them while exacting subtle psychological tolls. Their interactions with outsiders, visitors, townsfolk, travelers, reflect an acute awareness of human vulnerability. They do not coerce in the conventional sense, but the accumulation of their presence, their rituals, and the ineffable tension surrounding them produces an effect indistinguishable from manipulation. What might appear at first as ageless beauty and serene composure is, in reality, a carefully constructed environment that bends perception and erodes certainty. And there, hidden within the edges of surviving accounts, lie the most troubling details. The sisters' dietary, temporal, and ritual patterns hint at a possible exchange, life preserved at the expense of something else. The physician who stayed in 1848 wrote, "I cannot speak freely. The patterns suggest a reciprocity I dare not name. One's very essence seems to waver in their presence. The food they consume, the ceremonies they perform, all point to a mechanism of preservation that is not wholly natural." Again, the text is fragmentary, but the meaning is unmistakable. Longevity may have been achieved, but it was bought with an invisible, perhaps metaphysical, currency. The nature of this exchange, like so much else about the sisters, remains obscured, lost, perhaps deliberately, in the fog of time and secrecy. And yet, for all their preservation, there are signs of strain. Diaries indicate occasional quarrels, murmurs of dissent, and fleeting moments of despair. These brief glimpses of vulnerability are quickly redacted, burned, or hidden in archives, as if the sisters themselves or their chroniclers were aware that such cracks could unravel the entire illusion. What endures in the records, therefore, is both revelation and concealment. Meticulous documentation of the impossible, tempered by self-imposed, or externally imposed, obfuscation. The Halloways exist as both truth and legend, visible and obscured, human and otherwise. By the late 1850s, the sisters' patterns of ritual and observation had begun to take on a more alarming precision. A surviving account from a traveling merchant, partially scorched and annotated in the margins with the words, "Do not trust memory," describes his first night on the estate. "I slept in a room at the rear. The sisters moved silently as if through walls. I heard murmurs, a rhythm, a language I did not know, yet it resonated through my chest. When I awoke, the sun had shifted, yet my watch recorded only hours past. Something in this house bends time itself, and I fear I was marked." The subtle distortion of time recurs in almost every external account. Visitors lost hours or days without realizing it, their sense of chronology fraying. The sisters' presence seems to exert a gravitational pull on perception, bending reality into a state that is neither dream nor waking life, yet fully tangible. Inside the house, fragments of correspondence hint at both methodical experimentation and obsession. One letter, addressed to an unknown correspondent and found in a private collection of papers in Nashville, reads, "We must remain consistent. Each action, each meal, each hour observed, forms the lattice that holds us together. Stray even slightly and the decay will reach us, not outwardly but inwardly. We are threads in a pattern the world cannot perceive, yet it watches nonetheless." The precision and insistence on repetition suggest that the sisters' longevity was not merely accidental or mystical. It was cultivated, maintained through exacting ritual. Yet there is an undercurrent of dread. Their careful order hints at fragility beneath the apparent perfection. Observers, long after their departures, note the same uneasy quality, an impression that the house and its inhabitants are perpetually on the edge of collapse, as if one misstep could unravel decades of meticulous preservation. Accounts of their appearance, as disturbing as the psychological effects, remain consistent across decades. In 1853, a physician who had corresponded with colleagues in Boston and Philadelphia described seeing the sisters for 3 days. Their skin is pale yet impervious to the sun. Their eyes observe without blinking, yet they do not miss detail. Speech is deliberate, measured. I noted the absence of decay, the absence of fatigue. Yet there is a weight in their gaze, an accumulation of decades that presses upon one's chest. I left with a tremor that lingered weeks, inexplicable and deep. What is most compelling about these descriptions is not the supernatural element, but the physical, almost scientific documentation of the sisters' anomaly. This is a recurring motif. Every observer, trained or otherwise, is forced to confront the undeniable while simultaneously doubting their own perception. But not all encounters ended with mere disorientation. One particularly chilling diary entry, found in fragments in a burned collection in Memphis, describes a family friend who spent a month on the property in 1856. The account reads, "At first, the presence is subtle. The sisters do not speak. The air grows heavier, and even shadows seem delayed. On the 20th night, I awoke to find one at the foot of my bed, studying me. I cannot describe the emotion, part fascination, part terror, but I felt as if my soul had been catalogued. I left at dawn, yet each step outside the house felt slower, heavier, as if reality itself had warped around me. Days later, I could not remember if I had truly been gone, or merely dreaming of leaving." The recurring motif of distorted temporality, of stretched hours and warped perception, emerges as central to understanding the sisters. They are not merely unaging. They are anchors in a shifting temporal field, exerting influence on minds as well as bodies. Their rituals, often referenced but rarely described fully, appear to be a combination of mystical symbolism and precise methodology. One fragment, a half-burned page found tucked in a physician's notebook, reads, "Moonlight, circle, root, ink. Repeat thrice. Then consume what the pattern allows." The circle maintains equilibrium, disruption invites decay. The ambiguity of language, the mixture of seemingly mundane ingredients with ritualized instruction, suggests that their methods were designed to operate on multiple planes simultaneously: physical, psychological, and possibly metaphysical. No contemporary observer could fully comprehend the purpose or the consequences of these actions, yet everyone sensed the danger implicit in even glimpsing the process. In 1858, an entire family visiting from neighboring Davidson County reported a terrifying encounter. They described approaching the estate with polite curiosity, only to find the sisters waiting silently on the porch. The mother later wrote in a letter, preserved but heavily redacted, that their presence is not of this world. Each movement is deliberate, each glance pierces past the body. My children became restless, speaking in tongues I did not recognize, and when we turned to leave, we could not find the gate we entered through. Only after what felt like hours, though the sun had barely moved, did we escape. The air on the road felt different, as if the house had left a residue upon the land itself. This fragment demonstrates not only the psychological reach of the sisters but also the subtle manipulation of space and perception. They were capable of warping the environment in ways that defied logic yet left undeniable, haunting traces. Curiously, while the sisters' influence on outsiders is well documented, their internal dynamics remained enigmatic. A rare fragment of Clara's diary, dated 1857, hints at tension among them. "We quarrel tonight over the sequence. Josephine insists on deviation. I fear her rebellion may unravel us. Yet Eliza calms with ritual, and Margaret mirrors the pattern. I am left between them, trembling at the edge of certainty." The language suggests that even within their preserved state, the sisters faced the consequences of minor deviations. Their longevity, therefore, is not absolute freedom. It is a careful balance maintained through control, precision, and mutual complicity. Any misstep carries the risk of unraveling both body and mind. And then there is the matter of disappearance. While some visitors emerged traumatized but alive, others were never seen again. County records are sporadic and heavily redacted, but surviving fragments suggest a recurring pattern: Outsiders who spent prolonged time on the estate, particularly those who observed the sisters too closely or attempted to inquire into their rituals, vanished with no trace. One fragment from an 1861 sheriff's report reads, "Two men arrived seeking knowledge. Left provisions at the gate. Neither returned. No tracks remain. Inquiry futile." Patterns like this recur in multiple sources: letters, diaries, and newspaper snippets. It appears the sisters maintained boundaries, whether consciously or through some unrecorded mechanism, ensuring that only those deemed safe could leave unscathed. The psychological toll on these outsiders is also evident. A physician's notebook fragment from 1860 describes an observer who spent 3 nights in proximity to the sisters. Upon leaving, patient exhibits extreme agitation, obsessive note-taking, and repeated questioning of his own memory. Describes seeing shadows stretch like fingers and hearing voices in the silence. Effect appears lasting and deep. Here, the repeated references to shadows, silence, and perception underscore a recurring theme. The sisters' influence is not merely external but invasive, altering cognition in ways that persist long after the encounter. Even documentation itself seems to carry this subtle contamination, which may explain why fragments are often burned, lost, or heavily redacted. The sisters' isolation is another element of the mystery. While they appear occasionally in public records or anecdotal accounts, there is never evidence of a life integrated with broader society. They do not marry, have children, or participate in conventional labor. Their world is confined to the estate, the surrounding woods, and the fragmented social interactions they permit. Yet their presence extends far beyond these boundaries, as suggested by the persistent, sometimes obsessive attention from travelers, doctors, and writers. The Halloways are simultaneously anchored and pervasive, a paradox that underscores the central tension of their existence. They are present without inhabiting, visible without being accessible, enduring without interacting in conventional terms. Around the midpoint of their documented history, a notable escalation occurs. Multiple accounts from the 1860s describe disturbances in nearby farms. Livestock disappearing, strange patterns scorched into fields, and even inexplicable shifts in weather localized around the estate. While there is no direct evidence linking the sisters to these phenomena, the timing and consistency of reports suggest a connection. A fragment from a farmer's journal, dated 1863, reads, "The cornfield trembled at night. I saw figures moving in impossible shapes. They do not leave the house, yet they reach out with a weight that bends the air. I dare not return." Whether interpreted as superstition or as an extension of the sisters' influence, these accounts contribute to the growing aura of dread surrounding the estate. And yet, even with these escalating phenomena, the sisters themselves remain outwardly calm, their composure unshaken. Their longevity seems to grant them immunity to fear, fatigue, or pain, but it does not grant them clarity. Clara's diary hints at quiet torment. "We speak less to one another. Silence is safer. Yet even silence hums with memory. I cannot forget the ones we have marked, nor the hours we have bent. Sometimes I fear eternity itself is a weight too heavy." There is an existential horror embedded here. Immortality maintained through ritual, observation, and control, but accompanied by a relentless psychological burden. The sisters' agelessness is thus inseparable from suffering, internal and external alike. At this juncture, it is impossible to ignore the recurring motif of surveillance and reciprocity. Observers consistently report feeling catalogued, measured, and analyzed in ways that transcend social interaction. Simultaneously, the sisters' own records reveal a meticulous attention to detail, suggesting that they are both subjects and agents in a system of observation. One fragmentary letter, partially redacted and dated 1859, reads, "We watch, but we are watched. The circle maintains itself, yet it whispers of cracks. Each observer is a test. Each deviation a note in the ledger of our survival." This duality, of passive observation and active maintenance, adds another layer to their psychological complexity. Their existence is both a puzzle and a trap. One can study them, but the act of studying carries consequences that extend beyond comprehension. By the 1870s, whispers of the Holloway sisters had begun to seep into more formal documentation, though always indirectly, always incomplete. One surviving police ledger, its pages yellowed and water-stained, notes, "Investigate property on Northern Ridge. Witnesses report women who do not age, shadows move against light, animals avoid vicinity. Approach with caution. Records to remain confidential." Even here, the language is clinical, but the undertone is unmistakable. This is not merely a curiosity but a hazard, something to be monitored, catalogued, and, if possible, contained. And yet, the sisters were never formally apprehended, nor confronted. Their influence was subtle enough to evade direct action, yet pervasive enough to leave long-term psychological and environmental disturbances. An unusual pattern emerges in accounts from this period. The Holloway's ability to manipulate perception seemed to expand. One visitor, a young teacher traveling from Kentucky, described his experience in a journal later recovered in a burned collection. "We arrived at twilight, and the house seemed larger than the map suggested. Halls stretched further, doors appeared where none existed before. Their voices were soft, measured, yet the echo followed me into dreams. Time itself bent. I cannot claim certainty of night or day. They are not cruel, yet their presence is a labyrinth." This distortion of physical space, combined with their temporal manipulation, suggests that the sisters' longevity and rituals may have granted them a more profound command over the very dimensions of perception. Reality, it seems, was an instrument they could subtly tune, forcing the outsider into a liminal state of heightened awareness and disorientation. Even amidst these disturbances, fragments suggest a fragile adherence to internal rules. Clara's diary, partially destroyed in a fire decades later, contains a rare, intimate admission. "We are tethered not only to the circle but to one another. Should any falter, the threads unravel. I sense it tonight, the weight of all we have preserved, the temptation to deviate." Josephine watches always and Eliza recalibrates. Margaret mirrors our intent, yet sometimes even she hesitates. I wonder if eternal vigilance is a punishment or a gift we cannot recognize. This internal vigilance hints at the sisters' psychological fragility despite their outwardly preserved bodies. Their survival is not only a matter of ritual, it is a delicate, almost obsessive management of behavior, thought, and interaction. Theirs is an existence bound by structure, fear, and unspoken rules, suggesting that the secret to their agelessness is as much psychological as it is physical. Around this time, an anonymous account emerges, later archived in a private collection in Nashville, that provides an eerie glimpse into the sisters' methods. The observer, whose identity is obscured, describes what they call the evening convergence. Each night, the sisters gather in the central hall. A circle is drawn with chalk, herbs strewn about in patterns I cannot decipher. Their chant rises and falls low, like the pulse of the earth itself. I cannot translate the words, but I felt them inscribe something upon the air, upon me. I do not remember leaving, only that I awoke outside the gate as the sun rose. The hour was later, though my mind insists no time has passed. I am not sure I am sane, yet I cannot deny what I have witnessed. Here we see evidence of ritualistic structure, yet the details remain cryptic, intentionally obscured, perhaps to shield outsiders from the full magnitude of the sisters' capabilities. Accounts of the psychological aftermath of contact are equally disturbing. Visitors report nightmares that mirror the sisters' behaviors, obsessive note-taking, and a pervasive sense that one's own mind is being catalogued. One fragmentary physician's report notes, patient arrived 3 days post-visit, presenting with paranoia, insomnia, and vivid hallucinations. Describes repeated imagery of 4 women whose faces do not change, whose eyes penetrate memory itself. Cognitive functions otherwise intact. No physical injury observed. Condition persists over weeks. Observer notes patient reluctant to leave home. It is a recurring motif, Proximity to the Halloways produces effects that linger far beyond the temporal or spatial boundaries of the estate. The sisters' influence is not direct harm but cognitive erosion, slow, insidious, and unnerving. By the 1880s, more direct attempts at understanding, or perhaps challenging, the sisters' existence appear in correspondence. A letter from a professor of natural philosophy dated 1883 reveals both fascination and dread. I have endeavored to quantify the anomaly, to measure the apparent cessation of senescence. Yet instruments fail, and my own observations betray inconsistencies that defy explanation. Their eyes observe not only the body but the mind. Their ritual seems to bind temporal mechanics in a way I cannot reconcile. I fear that to approach too closely is to risk irretrievable confusion. The language of the report is precise, scientific, yet the underlying fear is palpable. The Halloways do not merely resist time, they warp perception itself, challenging every assumption about human experience, observation, and causality. One of the most haunting accounts from this period involves a young lawyer who, seeking to investigate property boundaries near the Halloway estate, kept a detailed diary. Entries from October 1884 describe unsettling events. The house shifts. Halls extend, ceilings lower. Shadows move contrary to light. On 3 occasions I passed the same room twice, yet objects had relocated. The sisters appeared at the staircase, silent, observing. I felt my thoughts catalogued. I fled, yet still hear the echo of their presence in my study miles away. Cannot sleep. Cannot forget. The diary, recovered decades later, emphasizes that even brief exposure carried long-term effects. Psychological imprinting, spatial distortion, and temporal disorientation appear to be recurring consequences of proximity. Yet, amidst these growing disturbances, the sisters remained enigmatic in motivation. Clara's fragments suggest self-awareness of both their preservation and the burden it entails. The balance is delicate. Each step, each breath, each hour observed must align. A deviation is a crack in the lattice. We are neither entirely free nor entirely bound, yet eternity insists upon vigilance. I sometimes wish for decay to be ordinary, to forget. But the pattern cannot be undone. The language implies not hubris, but a somber recognition of cost. Their agelessness is not an achievement. It is a careful, almost torturous equilibrium, requiring constant maintenance, observation, and self-control. Perhaps most chilling are the disappearances that continue into this era. One fragmentary newspaper clipping from 1885, heavily redacted, notes, "Local merchant fails to return from visit to Halloway estate. Family reports no further information. Inquiry ongoing." Similar accounts appear sporadically, suggesting that contact with the sisters carries a latent danger, whether through direct intervention, environmental manipulation, or psychological compulsion. In each case, witnesses and investigators are left with fragmented impressions, memories altered, perception warped, understanding incomplete. The sisters' isolation, internal tension, and external influence combine to create a phenomenon both compelling and terrifying. They are simultaneously agents and prisoners of their own longevity. Their rituals, meticulously recorded in partial fragments, suggest a system designed to preserve not merely physical form, but the intricate web of influence, observation, and psychological impact that defines their existence. Deviations, whether accidental or intentional, threaten the structure, introducing fear, instability, and potential unraveling. Here it is worth pausing to consider the implications. The Halloway sisters' story forces us to confront the fragility of perception itself. Time, memory, and reality appear mutable in their presence. Observers become participants in an unknowable pattern, their senses and cognition subtly bent, their memories stretched and refracted. And for the sisters, the cost of this maintenance is perpetual vigilance, isolation, and an unceasing weight of consciousness. One might wonder, are they victims of their own longevity or architects of a system that ensures survival at any cost? The answer, like much else about the Halloways, remains obscured. Before we proceed further, I invite you to reflect and engage. If you feel the tension of observation, the pull of unseen influence, Comment below with the phrase, "The door is open," an acknowledgement of proximity to truths hidden in shadows. Consider subscribing to join our society of truth seekers, where the pursuit of forbidden knowledge is both our calling and our burden. And share your theories in the comments. What sustains the sisters? What unseen mechanism preserves them through decades while ensnaring those around them? The final decades of the sisters' existence are marked by even more disturbing phenomena. One surviving diary fragment from 1892, its edges burned, ink faded, describes what the author calls the night of enumeration. They stood in the hall for shadows, yet more than 4, counting. I cannot recall what was counted, hours, souls, breaths, but the pattern was precise. To watch was to be counted oneself. I awoke outside the estate, my mind racing, my vision blurred. Something remains with me. These descriptions, brief as they are, suggest that the sisters' rituals may have extended beyond self-preservation, implicating the very fabric of life, perception, and perhaps mortality itself. Their actions create a liminal space in which outsiders, and perhaps themselves, become part of an ongoing, incomprehensible system. The house itself remained a repository of these enigmas. Observers describe interiors that defy logic, staircases that twist in impossible directions, doors that open onto empty fields or walls, shadows that move independently of their source. Jars of unknown specimens, fragments of handwritten notes, and cryptic symbols littered the halls. Every object, every trace, seems part of a larger pattern that outsiders cannot decode but instinctively recognize as dangerous. The sisters' environment is thus both a laboratory and a trap, a reflection of their meticulous maintenance of existence and a mechanism by which influence extends outward, affecting all who come near. As the 1890s progressed, reports suggest that the sisters' influence began to manifest in more aggressive psychological effects. Diaries from visitors surviving these encounters describe phenomena that go beyond disorientation into a territory that defies conventional understanding. One fragmentary account, found in a partially burned notebook in Franklin, Tennessee, reads, "The house watches. Not the walls, not the floor, but the very air. My thoughts, my movements, my memories, catalogued without touch. I hear whispers in my own voice repeating things I never thought aloud. I cannot leave. I do not know if I wish to." Here, the invasion of perception reaches its peak. The sisters' influence is no longer merely environmental. It is cognitive, extending into the very fabric of consciousness. Observers reported that prolonged exposure produced obsessive behavior, compulsive note-taking, and recurring hallucinations, both auditory and visual, that persisted long after they departed the estate. Even the sisters' internal correspondence hints at a growing awareness of the danger inherent in their state. A fragment from Clara's diary, dated 1895, describes tension among them. Josephine lingers too long at the window. She counts too deeply. Margaret falters in the ritual. Eliza recalibrates, but I sense strain. The pattern is delicate. Any misalignment threatens all. I fear we cannot sustain it forever. These entries reveal that the system maintaining their longevity required constant vigilance and mutual compliance. Their agelessness, far from a gift, is a perpetual exercise in control and precision, an intricate balancing act whose failure could invite disaster, not merely for themselves but potentially for anyone who crosses their threshold. At the same time, rumors of vanished visitors intensify. A surviving sheriff's report, partially redacted and dated 1896, reads, 3 men entered property seeking curiosity. None returned. Search conducted. No tracks found beyond the gate. Property appears undisturbed otherwise. Further investigation deemed inadvisable. This pattern, consistent with earlier decades, suggests a deliberate mechanism of control. Whether the disappearances were psychological, mystical, or physical remains a matter of speculation, but the repetition is undeniable. Those who attempted to probe the sisters' practices too closely were removed from conventional reality, leaving only fragments of memory or records behind. By the dawn of the 20th century, the estate had acquired a mythic aura beyond its immediate locality. Travelers, writers, and occult investigators recorded encounters in fragmented journals, letters, and reports. One surviving observer, a British anthropologist, wrote, "The house and its occupants exist on a plane that intersects with perception, yet eludes measurement. They are at once human and other. Proximity induces unease, disorientation, and compulsive observation. It is as if the sisters themselves are instruments of time, bending it to their will." The language reflects both awe and terror. The sisters' influence is described consistently across decades: distortion of perception, temporal manipulation, and the psychological imprint of observation. Clara's diary fragments, preserved in a private collection, hint at a complex system of internal governance designed to prevent collapse. We speak little. Every word, every glance, every hour must align. One mistake could unravel the lattice. We maintain each other, yet each is alone with the burden. I wonder if eternity itself conspires to punish our vigilance. These lines underscore the central paradox of their existence. Perfect preservation comes at the cost of perpetual anxiety, isolation, and a meticulously maintained hierarchy of control. Their longevity is inseparable from mental discipline and ritual, suggesting that the sisters' power over time may have been contingent on psychological rigor as much as physical or mystical practice. By the 1910s, the Holloway estate had begun to decay in its surroundings, yet the sisters themselves remained untouched by time. Visitors' reports described the house as an anchor in a landscape increasingly dominated by modernity. One observer, a young writer in 1912, recorded, "Fields have grown wild. Trees lean unnaturally. The house looms unchanged, eternal. And four figures move within, their presence commanding, yet impossibly still. Time outside bends, yet inside remains the same. They are the axis of something I cannot name." The juxtaposition of environmental decay with the sisters' permanence reinforces the unsettling perception that they are not simply ageless humans, but entities exerting influence over both mind and space. Accounts of their rituals, though scarce, continue to emerge in fragmented form. One observer's diary from 1915 describes, "The sisters gather at midnight. Circle drawn with chalk, herbs arranged with precision. Chanting rises and falls like the tide. I cannot comprehend language, yet I understand its intent. Energy hums, thick and tangible, and I feel catalogued, measured, assessed. I leave with tremors, yet I know I have witnessed something profound and dangerous." These fragments are consistent with decades of previous accounts, suggesting continuity and meticulous maintenance of ritual over time. The psychological effect on those who encountered the sisters intensified as well. Multiple accounts describe visitors experiencing vivid hallucinations, obsessive behaviors, and cognitive dissonance. One surviving physician's report, dated 1917, notes, "Patient presents with paranoia, insomnia, compulsive note-taking, and recurring auditory hallucinations. Describes being observed constantly, even after leaving the estate. No physical signs of illness, yet mental state deteriorating. Effect appears long-term, possibly permanent." The repeated mention of ongoing psychological disturbance highlights the enduring and pervasive influence the sisters exerted on outsiders. Internal tensions among the sisters themselves become more evident in surviving fragments. Clara's diary, partially burned, contains an entry from 1918. Josephine falters in the circle. Eliza recalibrates. Margaret hesitates. I watch, fearful, aware that any misalignment threatens all. We are bound to this pattern and it binds us. I envy the passing of others, their freedom and time. We endure, yet at what cost? These lines reveal that their state of agelessness is not without strain. Despite their outward calm and apparent control, the sisters are acutely aware of the fragile balance maintaining their continued existence. Even as the decades progressed, the sisters' influence extended beyond immediate visitors. Local folklore, newspapers, and scattered diaries reference inexplicable phenomena in the surrounding area. Livestock disappearing, strange patterns burned into fields, and environmental distortions near the estate. One fragmentary newspaper clipping from 1920 reads, "Residents report unnatural stillness around Holloway property. Trees lean toward windows, animals avoid land. Sounds described as whispers in the wind, leaving observers uneasy. Authorities advise caution." These reports, though sporadic, are remarkably consistent with earlier accounts, suggesting that the sisters' presence continued to shape perception, behavior, and environment over generations. Perhaps most chilling is the notion that the sisters' rituals and practices may have involved an exchange, an unseen cost that sustains their longevity. A fragmentary physician's note from 1922 hints at this possibility. Observations suggest that longevity maintained by sisters may come at an invisible cost, potentially psychological or metaphysical. Patterns in behavior, diet, and ritual imply a system of preservation beyond natural explanation. Those who linger experience lasting cognitive disturbance. The precise nature of this exchange remains unknown, but the implications are profound. Immortality may not be a gift, but a carefully managed system requiring sacrifice, vigilance, and perhaps the absorption of influence or energy from the outside world. Here it is worth pausing once more to reflect. The Holloway sisters' story is not one of mere curiosity, it is an exploration of perception, time, and the human mind. They are simultaneously anchors in reality and disruptors of it, their existence challenging assumptions about life, mortality, and consciousness. Contact with them is transformative, often unsettling, and occasionally dangerous. I encourage you now to comment below with your theories and impressions. What sustains the sisters? What unseen mechanisms preserve their agelessness while ensnaring others? Share your insights with our Society of Truth Seekers. Even as the decades unfolded, the Holloway sisters' presence remained a constant in a world rushing toward modernity, their house a monument of stilled time amidst shifting landscapes. By the 1920s, observers reported that the estate exuded an almost palpable gravity, an invisible pull that compelled attention and, for some, obsession. A fragmentary account from a traveling historian, discovered tucked in a forgotten library archive, recounts, approaching the house, the air thickened, the light dimmed as though filtered through an unseen lens. The sisters stood at the windows, unmoving, observing. I felt compelled to speak, yet words froze. Every instinct demanded retreat, yet every step forward was inexorable. Time itself seemed to hesitate. This sense of suspended reality recurs across decades of testimony. The sisters did not merely survive. They altered the very perception of those around them, bending cognition, emotion, and temporal awareness into patterns they alone controlled. Clara's diary fragments from 1925 hint at internal strain growing more pronounced. We falter each in turn. Josephine questions sequence. Eliza recalibrates frantically. Margaret hesitates. I feel the weight of decades pressing upon us, yet the pattern demands completion. One error, one misalignment, and all unravels. I envy mortality, for it carries ignorance and relief. We endure, yet at a cost beyond comprehension. These passages reveal that their longevity is not simply maintained by ritual, but by a complex interplay of attention, precision, and collective vigilance. Their unity, once a source of strength, becomes a fragile lattice, one misstep threatening both body and mind. Accounts of visitors during this period grow increasingly harrowing. One young physician's report, partially redacted, describes experiences that push beyond disorientation into profound psychological intrusion. Patient reports inability to distinguish hours from minutes. Thoughts feel catalogued, memories overlaid with foreign impressions. Visual and auditory hallucinations persist, specifically of 4 women watching silently. Patient's cognitive function intact but reports profound and persistent anxiety. These observations indicate that the sisters' power was not limited to isolation. They projected influence outward, producing lasting and sometimes permanent psychological effects on anyone who approached too closely. Environmental anomalies near the estate also intensified. Local farmers who had observed strange occurrences for decades began reporting increasingly vivid phenomena: crops withering overnight in geometric patterns, animals avoiding entire fields, and faint auditory echoes of chant or whispers carried on the wind. A fragment of a 1927 newspaper clipping notes, "Residents report unnatural stillness, with trees leaning unnaturally, shadows stretching contrary to light." Holloway Estate appears to manipulate environment itself. Authorities advise avoidance. It is as if the sisters' rituals had grown more powerful over time, extending beyond their immediate space to warp perception and reality on a larger scale. The internal mechanisms sustaining their longevity remain tantalizingly obscure. A rare fragment of Josephine's own writing, preserved in a private collection, reads, "The circle binds us, yet it binds others as well. Our longevity exacts a toll we do not fully comprehend. Each visitor, each observer, each unwitting participant becomes a thread in the pattern. To falter is to risk unraveling the lattice, yet adherence consumes all thought, all desire. We endure, yet the cost is unseen." These lines suggest that the sisters' preservation is both a solitary and collective enterprise, requiring not only ritual but psychological discipline, precision, and constant vigilance. It is an existence defined as much by restraint as by longevity, a delicate equilibrium that may have extended outward, ensnaring those who cross their path. In the early 1930s, a young folklorist visiting Tennessee to document regional legends recorded a chilling anecdote from an elderly neighbor. "The sisters are still there, still watching. I saw them last as a boy, their faces had not changed. My father said he felt the air thicken when near the house, as though something alive and unseen observed him. No one dares enter. Those who do, return hollow or not at all." This passage reinforces the persistent motif of observation and intrusion. The sisters' power appears less overtly supernatural than insidiously cognitive, a manipulation of perception, a subtle bending of reality that leaves observers irrevocably altered. An especially disturbing report from 1936 hints at the culmination of their influence. A traveling naturalist whose notes survive in fragmented form recounts, "I approached at dusk. The estate seemed to expand, corridors elongating unnaturally. Shadows moved independently of light. I felt catalogued as if my thoughts were being inscribed upon an invisible ledger. The sisters appeared at intervals, silent, unblinking, unwavering. When I fled, the path itself seemed to shift behind me. I arrived miles away, uncertain of hours or distance. Something of me remained there." Across decades, this pattern remains consistent. Outsiders experience temporal disorientation, cognitive intrusion, and persistent psychological residue, suggesting that the sisters' longevity is inseparable from their capacity to influence reality itself. Clara's final fragments, dated late 1937, offer a rare glimpse into their psychological interior. "We grow weary yet cannot stop. The lattice demands completion. We observe and are observed, a pattern unbroken by time or absence. The weight presses, the pattern trembles, and yet we endure. I wonder if eternity itself conspires against us, if the very passage of decades seeks to undo what we preserve. Yet the circle holds, tenuous and fragile as all things must." These entries convey not triumph but a haunting awareness of cost. Preservation exacts a relentless toll, a psychological and perhaps metaphysical price that becomes more acute with each passing year. By the late 1930s, the Holloway estate had become largely inaccessible. Rumors of disappearances, psychological trauma, and environmental distortion discouraged all but the most daring visitors. A surviving police record from 1938 reads, "All inquiries into property denied. Residents report continued unusual phenomena, specifically displacement of objects, anomalous auditory experiences, and distress among observers. Avoidance recommended. Even official authorities tacitly acknowledged that proximity carried danger, though their language remains cautious and oblique. The sisters, meanwhile, remained untouched by age, a living testament to the anomalies documented over a century. Yet, even in apparent stability, the pattern of internal tension persisted. Josephine's fragmentary notes describe a delicate balance. Margaret hesitates, Eliza recalibrates, Clara watches. The circle must remain intact. One misstep, one deviation, and all unravels. I sense it pressing closer with each passing hour, a weight not of body but of perception itself. The sisters' existence, therefore, is a continuous negotiation between ritual, observation, and psychological endurance. Longevity is inseparable from discipline, and their preservation appears dependent on both internal cohesion and external influence. As we consider the legacy of the Holloway sisters, it is clear that their story is not merely historical curiosity. It is a psychological case study, a cautionary tale, and a haunting exploration of the human mind confronted with the impossible. Their rituals, their precision, and their unaging presence create a liminal space in which time, perception, and cognition are all subtly warped. Observers, both casual and professional, are consistently altered, sometimes irrevocably, by exposure. Their story challenges assumptions about mortality, perception, and reality itself. Now, as you reflect on this dark history, consider the weight of observation, the power of ritual, and the unseen costs of immortality. The Holloway sisters remind us that longevity is never free, that presence can alter perception, and that some patterns, once established, may endure beyond comprehension. Share your theories in the comments. What sustains them? What unseen mechanisms allow them to bend time and perception while ensnaring those who approach? Comment, subscribe, and join our society of truth seekers, where the pursuit of forbidden knowledge binds us together. History hides more than it reveals. The world outside the Holloway estate marched forward, yet inside, time remained a lattice of perpetual observation and ritual. By the 1940s, even distant observers, those who never dared approach, felt the estate's influence through rumor, instinct, and the unsettling tales of local residents. One fragmentary interview, preserved in a 1942 newspaper archive, recounts, "I never saw them, not directly, but the children swore they watched from the windows. Fields near the house rippled strangely in sunlight. Livestock refused to enter the pastures. My husband claims he heard whispers, though the house was empty. I do not speak of it much, yet the air carries their presence still." The estate's reputation had evolved from curiosity to subtle terror. The sisters' power was less about confrontation and more about perception, a silent pressure pressing on all who approached, even indirectly. Clara's final surviving fragments, scribbled in a journal so damaged it seems miraculous any words remain, hint at both reflection and dread. Decades have passed. We have endured, yet the lattice feels strained. Josephine falters at times. Eliza recalibrates with effort. Margaret hesitates. I am left to observe, to maintain the pattern. Eternity is heavy. Time itself leans upon us. The circle holds, fragile as mist. I wonder if the world outside perceives us, or merely the residue we leave in air and memory. Perhaps the lattice continues even if we do not. These words suggest that even as the sisters' physical forms persisted, the act of sustaining their longevity exacted an ever-increasing psychological toll. Survival is not triumph. It is labor, observation, and quiet terror carried out with meticulous precision. Accounts of visitors during these later decades remain scarce, likely because the estate had become nearly impenetrable. Yet fragments suggest the pattern continued. Lost travelers, subtle distortions of space, and lingering psychological effects. One letter, found in a burned collection of correspondence in Memphis, recounts a traveler who claimed to hear the sisters' voices in dreams long after leaving Tennessee. I have not returned to the estate, yet each night the whispers come. 4 voices, counting, observing, always present. I wake and hours are missing. The house feels present in my own home. I do not know if I am mad or cursed, only that something watches still. Even indirect exposure carried lasting consequences, reinforcing the sisters' reach beyond mere geography. The estate itself, according to a surviving 1947 property survey, remained largely unchanged. The house maintained an immaculate, if eerie, condition, gardens overgrown yet symmetrical, windows appearing to follow passers-by. Shadows fell oddly, angles of light behaved as if the space were slightly elastic. The surveyor, writing in private correspondence, noted, "I cannot describe fully, but the estate resists the passage of time. It is as if the world bends around it, accommodating the house and its unseen tenants. I have no desire to return." Once again, the sisters' influence manifests as a subtle distortion of perception, an almost gravitational pull on both mind and matter. By mid-century, the Holloway sisters had become a ghostly legend, names whispered in local communities, their story preserved in fragments, diary clippings, and partial reports. Scholars, folklorists, and the curious occasionally sought the estate, but few returned with coherent accounts. The sisters' ability to manipulate perception, warp time, and exert psychological influence remained intact, undiminished by the decades, yet increasingly inscrutable. Their existence straddled the line between reality and legend, a living archive of temporal and cognitive manipulation. One final fragment from a damaged diary dated 1950 offers the last glimpse of internal life. The lattice wavers yet holds. Each ritual, each observation, each silent moment is a thread. Josephine counts, Eliza recalibrates, Margaret mirrors. I watch, tremble, endure. Eternity is a weight. I wonder if the world beyond the gates perceives, or merely senses the pull of a pattern too vast to comprehend. We remain as we must, unseen yet observed. These lines, fragmentary and obscured, capture the essence of the sisters' existence. Vigilance, ritual, and psychological endurance, entwined with a subtle, pervasive influence on all who approach, even at a distance. And so the estate remains, its gates closed, its halls silent to all but those who dare enter. The sisters, whether still present in 1950 or beyond, are a testament to a power that is as invisible as it is inexorable. The ability to bend perception, warp time, and maintain existence at a cost so profound it defies human understanding. Accounts of visitors, fragments of diaries, and anecdotal evidence suggest that their influence lingers, like a residue in the air, a shadow in memory, a hum beneath the surface of reality itself. As we close this file, consider what it means to witness the impossible, to encounter those who exist beyond ordinary temporal bounds. The Holloway sisters are not merely a curiosity, they are a reminder that longevity is rarely a gift without cost, that perception can be weaponized, and that the unseen often exerts the greatest power. If you have theories, reflections, or insights, share them in the comments. Discuss the mechanisms, the rituals, the invisible patterns, and the legacy that endures beyond the estate's walls. History hides more than it reveals.